Greetings, everyone. Today we will talk about the city of Ahmedabad or Amdavad. This is the same city where your site is located in. The presentation is in two parts. First part is where we look at the city, how it functions, its urban growth. And the second part would be where we look at the site and its context. And hopefully that'll help you plan for the future of that site. My name is Arpan Johari. I'm the principal architect with AW Design, and let's begin. So Ahmedabad is an interesting city. It is India's first World Heritage Site identified by UNESCO, and I'll come to that in a bit, why we got the World Heritage status. So essentially, touching upon the theories of cities and urban design, Ahmedabad is essentially three cities in one. The first Ahmedabad is a 600-plus-year-old walled city founded by a king, where the main entrance of this city was by the way of a huge wooden gate and a number of medieval buildings done in Indo-Islamic architecture style that populated the place, along with tightly packed homes along narrow winding lanes. It is shown by that yellow dot on the plan. This was the time around 1411 AD. So this is how the city grew. This is the river Sabarmati, alongside the banks of which the city was set up. The first part of city was about 2.5 kilometers across, and this is the second Ahmedabad. The second Ahmedabad was a classic industrial city. So once the space around the river bank starts filling up, and then industry moves in, and it brings in more migrants and workers. So this is a classic industrial city developed during the later half of the 19th century around old villages on the periphery of the city. And it is characterized by industrial townships, slums, and chawls, multi-storied concrete slums, which all mushroomed around the textile mills, which brought in the industrialization to Ahmedabad city. And this is the difference from that 2.5 kilometers across. The yellow patch here is now increased. This is an example of the prowess of textile mills, and these were the engines of growth in Ahmedabad. The dark brown bits you see here are all textile mills, so most of them are dysfunctional now. But this is what gave Ahmedabad its industrial edge and advantage. So around the year 1884, that 2.5 kilometers has started growing to about twice the size. By around 1911, we see that the city is crossing over to the other side of the river. And this is the example of the third kind of city, which is an industrial city. This kind of city comes into existence when it is physically separated by a river, and the elites start crossing over the river. They don't want to live in tightly packed spaces, so they start looking out for a more, you may say, suburban area of sorts. And this is exactly what happened to Ahmedabad. The yellow hatch that you see here is all across the river, and this was the third Ahmedabad, and it started in the around the 1900s. That red dot which you see is your project site up on the top by the river. And you'll see a lot of cross-referencing of the project site location so that you get a better contextual understanding of how it is. And by the year 1939, this was the growth of Ahmedabad, and that 2.5 kilometer mark of the walled city is clearly seen. And against that, you can see how the city was expanding. By 1960, this was the urban expanse. By 1975, it grew to this size, and by the year 2020, it grew to about this size, from 2.5 kilometers across of being the walled city. Now it is at least 40 kilometers. And if you look at the urban jurisdiction, if you look at the jurisdiction of the urban authority, the ones who control all the building and planning in the city, it extends to about 70 kilometers top to bottom, and 70 kilometers across. So Ahmedabad, we have a huge advantage of being able to expand radially. We are not landlocked by any major geographical features. And as the radial expansion happens, you also can see the urban heat island effect is clearly increasing, and the farms are sort of going down. And in this image, you'll see there is some order in modern part of Ahmedabad, which is the western side, which is also the newer side. There is some sense of infrastructure planning. The yellow lines that you see here are the ring roads, and then the arterial roads that connect these ring roads. And our site is there shown by the green little dot. So if we talk of Ahmedabad as the western side and the eastern side, so the eastern side was where the city started growing from, the essential, the walled city. So it has got densities which are very, very tightly packed. And as people moved on to the western side, the densities have, you'll see porosity, you'll start seeing breathability onto the western side, which is the modern Ahmedabad, large part of which has happened in the last 70, 80 years. That is the project site. So our project site is on a very key location in the western part of, on the western side of the river. So if we look at that blue line, which essentially denotes the river, and the image on the right-hand side shows you the densities in the walled city. The purple fence is the walled city. And you can see how tightly knit, how tightly packed these places are. Up in the next image with reference to the same river onto the left-hand side is the western part of Ahmedabad, where you can see there's a lot more porosity, and it is not as tightly packed, because this is where the sense of planning and some formal order to city planning can be seen on the western side of the city. So putting these two together, Western Ahmedabad, Eastern Ahmedabad, it is a very, very clear case of how tightly built structures were on the eastern side and the western side. So just trying to reiterate my point from the few previous slides. If you look at the red box here, in the year 1981, the walled city population was 716 people per hectare, and just in a span of about 20 years, it went down to 560. So this clearly shows that people started moving out of the walled city into the across the river into areas which had better living conditions. And if you look at the second rectangle, which is about West Ahmedabad, 1981, it had 109 people per hectare, and then you can see a significant rise of 159 over the next 20 years. So people from this side of the city started going over to that side of the city, which is also depicted in the population density trends here. The blue bits are walled city, and the rest of the areas are the orange bits. So you can clearly see post 1981, the population density in the walled city started on a sharp decline. And this is a map that shows population density. Darker the color, the more dense the population is. And I'll move the green dot again, and you see it comes and places itself at a fairly dense area. It is dense because it is an informal housing. It is a slum of sorts. So on the western side, this is the you can clearly see lighter population densities, and our project site sits in some of the more dense areas in the western side. Now, sometimes you'll also experience different building heights and different densities even on the western side of the city, which is the planned part of the city. And sometimes you'll see that it does not have, it might have and it might not have formal ordering, which obviously leads to a lot of stress on the resources, on the infrastructure resources. And sometimes it looks like a case for despair generated by lack of formal design order. Ahmedabad has always seen a constantly shifting urban nuclei, which, if you refer back to the case of the three cities that we spoke of, now the urban nuclei from the walled city has shifted over across the river, and seen here are in the blue bits are the roads, and the red ones are the connections to the old city. Unlike any other great city in India, for example, Bombay, Calcutta, Chennai, Ahmedabad was not a creation of the British, but it's a city that, while remaining true to itself in context of the ruler who set it up, it successfully adapted to the new industrial age, carrying over commercial and industrial skills and at the same time being able to connect to its own heritage. So if you consider the historic city part example of, say, San Antonio, then the historic city is a really, really tiny part of an otherwise large city. And that is not, and that is completely opposite to what Ahmedabad is. The old city, or the historic part of the city, is still a bustling commercial and residential district. It's only that the nuclei has now shifted on across the river. And of course, this brings in its own challenges to bring in water, take off waste, build in the roads, right, put the buildings in the right number of buildings, right quality of buildings to be able to house all the citizens. So it's quite a challenge. This graph here shows the dark blue patch here shows how Ahmedabad, the size of Ahmedabad up till 1972, and the light green parts are size of Ahmedabad after 1972. So it has grown to almost twice its size in a span of around 20 years. The urban nuclei that I mentioned earlier, it shifts due to many reasons. India opened itself up to globalization in late 80s and early 90s. So that brought in a lot of economical, legislative, education and infrastructure related changes, which start becoming the pull push factors for shifting of this nucleus. In terms of, since we'll be dealing with housing and in terms of heritage, in terms of cultures, it is also noticed that sometimes cultural segregation also happens as the nuclei shift. So the image that you see here is of the 2.5 kilometer area walled across walled city part, where all the different gradients of gray depict different communities before people stepped over to the other side of the river. And this image here starts showing polarization of different communities. So some communities are shown in Hindu communities, as shown by the red lines, started to move to a different side of the city, and Muslim communities, shown by the blue line, started moving to different direction, almost polar to where the others started moving. So these are also effects of once the urban nuclei shifts. And of course, on the other side of the river, the new Ahmedabad, the opportunities for work and education are also much better. And hence that is also a driving force for people to jump over the river and come onto the other side. Now, a couple of satellite images to show you the urban expansion of Ahmedabad in context to the 2.5 kilometer walled city, and the green dot is still there where our project site is. So the first step over happened onto Ashram Road, which was a key a road of key commercial and financial importance. And then once it started getting saturated, the areas around it got saturated. Then the first ring road came in. Followed by the ring road was the blue bit, which is the CG road, which was the first planned commercial district in Ahmedabad. So the planning here was restricted up till the plot level, not within the plot level. The authorities did not give out guidelines on how the buildings within the plot should be. But otherwise, everything, the road widths, parking areas, walking areas, so they were all in place in CG road. Once it started getting saturated, then we got another ring road, and the areas between CG road and ring road started filling up. The green line that you see is the Mumbai-Delhi highway, and Ahmedabad falls on that. And the yellow bit that you see is the external ring road of Ahmedabad. So all this has happened in a span of about 60, 70 years. So the yellow bit is ring road, and there's a hatch beyond the ring road, with which we come to the idea of post-industrial edge cities. Ahmedabad is now forming multiple edge cities. It is not just one city, so we have a lot of multiple edge cities. This essentially happens when the first industrial city becomes so saturated and it eventually starts to die out, commerce starts to die out. It cannot provide for everybody around that area. So people start moving out into diverse suburban communities, the second industrial city, and then it starts creating other industrial areas. And Beyond these other industrial areas, we start seeing edge cities, which are engines of commercial growth. So one component of the city died, much like if you take the example of say Detroit, when automotive manufacturing went down. So the city sort of starts shrinking its chief activity, and then on the borders, which did not happen in the case of Detroit, but on the borders of Ahmedabad, because we are expanding readily, we have multiple edge cities. This is the example of one of those edge cities. This is also called Detroit of the East. So we have major automotive manufacturers setting their plants and vendor plants here, and with the hope that this edge city starts growing the way Ahmedabad did. The green line is the boundary of Ahmedabad. And we have 5 such edge cities around Ahmedabad. So the 40-kilometer across Ahmedabad expanse is shown by that black arrow along with the green dot for the project site. And if you think of it, then Ahmedabad is no longer constrained within those 40 kilometers. All these red rings that you see is also Ahmedabad, and also edge cities. Right. Moving on from how the city grew, we should also consider that sometimes urban regeneration projects like the riverfront also helps with shifting of the nuclei. So this is a 2001 image of the western and eastern side of the city, and you can see the river and its floodplains. That's when the riverfront project started, and in the next 5-6 years, you can see there's some sort of definition to the banks of the river. And by 2019, roughly a span of 18-19 years since it started, Ahmedabad has a formal riverfront. And the formal riverfront does a multitude of activities. One, it gives people a planned public realm. It allows for, it's got great plantation areas, so they act as lungs of the city. It also gives the city a physical infrastructure edge. And if you look at the case of riverfront before resilience, if we talk of resilience and sustainability, these 3 images show the condition of the river prior to the riverfront. The river stays dry for 7 to 8 months, and then in monsoons it breaks its banks, and you get all sorts of aquatic life coming into the homes. In the other periods of the year, while you're still extracting water from the river, and you look at the condition of the river, how dirty and polluted it was. Pollution aside, there is also the riverbanks generally provide room for migrant incremental housing. So the floodplains become the area where migrants come into the city who do not have money. They start setting themselves up, becoming the most rudimentary example of how how somebody starts their first steps in the city of Ahmedabad. With building of the riverfront, some of the livelihoods have also been displaced, and that again leads to shifting of the nucleus. Like laundry was a major activity, cattle rearing, market space. Now the market space is planned. This is an image from the 80s, and you can see how dry the riverbed is. Now, of course, with the riverfront, we have a planned area where this market happens. So old city, new city, Western Ahmedabad, Eastern Ahmedabad, whatever you call, the river has given it a physical edge, and alongside that physical edge are areas of development sites, which is real estate, areas of parks, gardens, sports facilities, a complete dedicated public realm where people could come, enjoy, relax, and feel proud about the city. These are some evening shots from the riverfront itself, and if you compare it to the images when the river was polluted, it's a completely different scene now. Okay, in this slide, we'll talk a little bit about the stark contrast in build forms that is seen in Ahmedabad. This image is taken from the western side of the city, and you can see a small twin otter aircraft. This is the second airport, or the Ahmedabad introduced the idea of seaplanes and waterplanes landing and taking off from the river Sabarmati itself. So while it is an absolute magnificent sight, right across the river in the red rectangle is one of the biggest slums that are there in Ahmedabad. So this is quite a stark contrast of prosperity and infrastructure and progress, while slums being right there in the heart of the city and being functioning as one of the key core areas of the city. This is an example of how the river was treated. Earlier, an embankment was built for buildings, and that embankment carried on till the property, till the line of property. If you look beyond in this picture, you'll see there are no hard embankments. Some of them are soft embankments. So these brought in a multitude of problems, and this is the same building with the riverfront that has been built in now. So it has got a riverfront drive that helps ease the traffic of the main roads, and it's got all these public parks. It definitely is an upgradation over this image here and this image here, which is set into the 20s. Now, let's have a look at the case of the walled city, or the city which essentially helped us get the World Heritage Site status. So this city was set up by a king called Ahmed Shah about 600 years ago. And the city center, or the citadel of the city, walled city, was characterized by a Hindu temple. So it's a very beautiful example of coexistence. No issues there with both the communities living together. The gray bits which you see here are the main roads, or the primary roads, and I'll come to that hierarchy in a bit. The city had many gates along the perimeter, which allowed entry and exit, and into what would have otherwise been a fortified area. The perimeter of this fortified wall is around 10 kilometers, 2.5 kilometers across, and there is also a very clear hierarchy. If you look at the image on the left hand side, the city center is the main public place, and then it becomes semi-public into walled, and then it becomes a gated society, even more private as a pole, and then it comes down to being an extremely private space, which is the house. So all that hierarchy was existing here. These are images of how the poles look now, and the visual interpretation of the poles has influences of many styles of architecture, both from within India and outside of India. So what is a pole? The four different colored bits you see here are predominantly the housing areas, and these would usually be occupied by people of the same community. So somebody in the orange pole would be a certain community, purple would be some specific community, brown is a specific community, so on and so forth. These were always alongside primary roads, where all the market streets, which we also called as bazaars, were prevalent. These went on into secondary roads. So you can see there's a hierarchy. The secondary roads are vehicular access roads, but they do not have any market sites. And then they come into tertiary roads. These tertiary roads would go into the pole, and it would always end in a dead end. It would never loop around. So if you consider the example of an Australian city of Melbourne or any other major American city, there was a reason why we did not go for block planning and why they always ended up in dead ends. These ended up in dead ends because Ahmedabad was invaded many times, and once the person carrying out the offensive enters these areas, they would come to a dead end, but they would not realize there are secret passages. So if you come to Ahmedabad and if you go on a heritage walk, you'll see a lot of secret passages still existing, which could have taken, which would have only been known to the people who were living there, and the offenders would then be caught in a soup. So these complex dead ends actually gave an illusion, and also it helped in segregating various poles, thus giving a certain degree of privacy to each community. If we look at these sections here, the secondary street, a very beautiful hierarchy. The secondary streets are broader, where you can see vehicular access, partial through traffic, and somewhat the residents are able to interact. Once you move into the tertiary street, which is a private street, you would just be able to walk along and chat with your neighbors or the people who live on the other side of your house. So a beautiful hierarchy that was seen here. The reason why poles or the city needed protection was because we were invaded, and Ahmedabad was invaded around 7 times in the last 600 years before we got our independence. So obviously you needed to protect your own community and your own likes. Now these images here are examples of how poles were designed. Poles would always be characterized by a single entry gate, a security tower or a watchtower on top of it, asymmetric streets, and all the homes built around public spaces. These public spaces were characterized by either a bird feeder or a building of religious interest. So as you can see, this red bit is the gate, and then it comes into the tertiary street. It gives a major interaction space for the communities living there. And these transitional spaces gave that opportunity to the residents to interact. It also gave residents an opportunity for their kids to play in a safe environment without intrusion from somebody from outside or without interaction with traffic that would have been out on the streets. Ahmedabad has always had a very deep relationship with different forms of life. So the yellow one there is a bird feeder where you would keep grain and water for the birds in the difficult summer months. They would come and sit there. Domestic animals, stray animals, if there's food left in the house, it would be fed to these animals. And it became a very cohesive, not just a society, not in terms of human to human interaction, but also in terms of human to animal interaction. The image that you see here is that of a tertiary street, and in a lot of places, the house extensions or the utility extensions were facing each other. So you can imagine there's a water storage tank, there's a wash area, and then you've got the street, and one could spend hours chatting around and doing the daily chores of laundry or cutting of vegetables or whatever it was, and deeply promoting social interaction. Again, another image of how the people would be sat on a place called Otlo, which was the front paved front yard of any house, where also can be called as the plinth. This is the plinth area. Okay, the traditional form of construction in the old city was a combination of wooden members that would be able to take tensile forces, and stone, brick plastered by a mix of either clay and cow dung, which managed to hold the bricks in their place. Such is the interest. Such is the construction quality of these poles, is that in 2001, when we had a major earthquake, none of these buildings went down, when a lot of them did go down on the western side of Ahmedabad. In terms of climate, if you look at the image on the left hand side, ground plus one structure, so a certain amount of daylight coming through in the street. But as population kept on increasing, we kept on adding floors, and that funneled the light coming through. And for a city like Ahmedabad, it helped in accommodating the increasing population and shading of streets during harsh summer months. But it also started affecting the quality of light getting on the ground. And if you do not get enough light, you start losing connection to the ground, and you want to move out. That's also one of the factors why people started moving out. Showing density of floating population here, you can see traffic and animals and humans with relation to the interaction spaces. And this is the density now, where it is hardly it's not possible for anyone to stop, pause, and talk. So areas like these, which used to be plazas or open spaces for people to come, sit, and chat, now it has given way for activities like parking. So you need to park your vehicles, you park them here because these are the only open places in the city. This plan is an example of a typical pole house, where it starts from the plinth, Otlo, comes into the chalk, which is the courtyard, and the family living activities happen at the ground floor. On the first floor are the bedrooms, and on the terrace is where one of the favorite pastimes of the state happened, which was kite flying. These are some restored buildings, which I believe are now in the hospitality industry. These are hotels available to stay in Ahmedabad, and they have all been restored to somewhat to their former glory. And you can very clearly see different architectural styles here, even though they are rooted very deeply with Ahmedabad itself. So this graph here shows up till 1930, poles were prevalent, and post 30s, when industrialization started happening, people started moving to the other side of the river. The form of houses which came into acceptance was chawls and row houses. Row houses are homes with common ground floor, first floor homes with common walls, and then bungalows and tenements, and then low-rise flats and high-rise apartments. So I'll show you images of what these all mean. This is an example of a chawl. If a family was to expand, they would simply rent or buy the room next doors, and it was characterized by a very, very long corridor on ground plus first and second and third floors wherever it went up to, usually 2 to 3 floors. These long corridors would have rooms falling on one side and a common area in the middle, and you can see in the common middle area motorcycles are parked, so the sense of having a common public space started to erode away. This is example of a tenement, which is a ground floor structure, and also row house is also similar, where you have got 2 homes with a common wall. From there, the trend of low-rise apartments started, and then high-rise apartments between 10 to 40 floors is where Ahmedabad aspires, where the city wants to live now. This graph again shows pole houses and the gradation, and how through the years housing typology changed. And if you look at the slum settlement, then that started from 1850s and went all up till now, which is the last image. These are the different dwelling types to give you an idea of the area requirements which are generally accepted here. So these are homes built by the government to rehab those which were living in the slums, and the slums have been raised down, and then permanent homes have been made for the slum dwellers. So this house has an area of 36 square feet. It has a living area, a sleeping area, toilet, kitchen, and a wash area. A bare minimum, smallest legally acceptable size in the city. And moving up from here is this is an affordable home by a private developer, which comes with slight more bells and whistles. On the graph on the right hand side bottom, you can see the demand for these homes is always higher than the supply. The white bit is demand and supply is the blue bit. But the moment you step into mid-income housing of 2 bedrooms or more, the demand for them goes down and the supply inventory for them is higher, which is also the case in 3 or 4 bedroom apartments, which are premium apartments, considered premium apartments in the city. The inventory is higher than the actual demand. Okay, quickly moving on. These are some images which show the river before and during the process of riverfront, and an image on the left-hand side, which is of the old city, which shows one of the gates. This image here indicates that the new city of Ahmedabad is being developed with a transit orientation in mind. So what this means is there are dedicated BRT, bus rapid transit corridors, there are metro train corridors to ease off the traffic and help people get from point A to point B. Alongside these corridors, you also have the changing FSI, which here we call as the floor space index, or it is also known as FAR. So wherever there is public transit zone, you get a higher FSI. Base FSI in Ahmedabad is 1.8, and a higher FSI at TO's transit oriented development is around 4. And we are also planning to think of a CBD style setup, which will have a very high FSI of 5.4, and which is seen here, both sides of the river. This is the BRT route map, and again, a couple of images showing what the BRT does. So the BRT pretty much gives a trunk and feeder system. So all the city municipal transport buses, which were earlier going from multiple buses on the same route, instead of that, now we have transportation spines in terms of metro and BRT, and all the other municipal services will feed into these lines, making it more efficient. And this is how the metro lines are set up in Ahmedabad. These dark brown bits, which you see, I'll keep on switching between these images. These dark brown bits that you see are actual slums in Ahmedabad. So the difference that you'll see in most of the Indian cities as opposed to other countries, is that slums are sat right in the middle of the city. They're not pushed to one different part of the city or one corner of the city, because the people who live in slums help out to run businesses. They do low skill jobs, so they have to be there. So slums for us is not just an area where we don't have proper sanitation or proper drinking water facilities. The areas landlocked in slum and the people who live there live in the slums help the city function. They're quite critical, and that's why it's very important to pay attention to the slums. And that's where our project site is shown by that green dot. Okay, so moving on from about Ahmedabad to the actual site, which is called Ramapir no Tekro. Tekro means a mound. So it is a small mound of Ramapir. And as you can see, the context of the site, it is quite near to the Sabarmati River. The one in the yellow hatch is the current built area on site. The blue bits that you see are where the usual floodplain is, which is not built in. We don't have exact numbers, but an approximation of 13,800-ish dwelling units on this site here. Major road connections, if we think of, then our site is sat there in brown, and right alongside the top edge of the site, we have the internal ring road, followed by the 120 feet ring road. The site itself sits alongside Ashram Road and not too far away from SP Ring Road. So it's quite a centrally located site. It also has the riverfront drive, maybe around 400 meters from where the site is. This also gives an idea of the proximity of the site to National Rail, and the red dotted lines are the main railway lines which are currently undergoing renewal and upgradation. And considering the fact that India probably has the biggest railway system in the world, these are quite key to the location of the site, and these lines connect us to different parts of the country. The site itself, the yellow dots that you see connected to go over the bridges into the old city and towards the walled city. The red dotted line is the 132 feet ring road, which is the second ring road belt. The white one is the key area of Ashram Road, which I had mentioned earlier was of key strategic and commercial importance. And the green bit is the road connecting them. So the site has got road on almost all its entire perimeter. It's a very, very key and strategic location. If you think of it, then the brown dot there is the interstate bus terminus, one of the major bus terminuses from where within the state or even outside the state buses would ply. And then the yellow boxes you see are the bus rapid transit stops, which are many alongside the perimeter of the site. The red bits are the municipal bus service stops, which is still running, and it would eventually become a feeder to either metro or BRT. And on the blue dot is Gandhi Ashram, which has got significant importance because of involvement of the ashram and M.K. Gandhi with the freedom movement of India. So it is a very interesting location for the site. The red dots that you see here are healthcare. Yellow dots are for school, but do not get too excited, because unfortunately the people who are living on the site, education and healthcare in these red and yellow dots are pretty much out of their financial bounds, because these are all corporate schools and hospitals. So usually the financial barrier, because of the financial barriers, dwellers in this site would not be able to access these facilities. The site, as I mentioned earlier, is of key strategic importance. It's very close to the proposed central business district, close to railway lines, major internal roads, major water bodies. So this is where the site is sat in Ahmedabad. If you look at the land use, then the dark yellow bit is formal housing. Often the formal and informal housing would be separated by a harsh physical edge. It could be a stream, a river, a road, a flyover, a bridge. An example that is very, very prevalent if you start looking at the case study of Mumbai airport and the areas around it. And in our case, it is this road, which pretty much physically segregates the formally ordered built. And now it starts making more sense, hopefully. On the left-hand side, you've got more ordered planning, and on the right-hand side, you've got very, very densely populated patches. Ancillaries, activities like shops, offices, banks, hotels, retail, religious buildings, hospitals are all shown in the legend, and they're all available around the site. If we look at the open fields, then there is this big green patch. Do not let this green into misleading you into thinking that, oh, this is a very nice site, but this green is just which is unbuilt. And because it's got a floodplain here, which is this, and hence the construction comes and stops till this edge. This is the floodplain and existing housing. And I think this is the site topography, site and the green patch inside it, bigger green patch, which runs alongside a swale, which connects to the water treatment plant of 60 MLD that treats any water coming out of this site before discharging it into the river. The site also has a lot of vocation and cottage industries based out of there. Some of them are paper making unit or cattle farming or pottery. Although these occupations do not form the large chunk of people on site, but it is still there. It's still some part of the population is involved in working here. And as you can see, if you are a potter, then you need immense amounts of area to be able to bake your ware. So there's pottery, and then there are organizations which help underprivileged women in terms of training them and helping them get jobs. So those organizations are also there on site. There is a handmade paper factory / industry, which helps which helps some of the locals there. But again, I would like to point out that not the entire population of this site works here. It's maybe a very small percentage, maybe somewhere between 2 to 5% of those within the working age would be involved here. The rest of them are all working in low-end or low-skilled jobs in helpful in running offices, homes, city, and of its likes. Okay, this image here is of quite a lot of interest, and you would want to consider this as one of the key influences of your design basis. The pink parts that you see is the multi-use space. So whether it's a ground floor home or a ground floor, first floor home, the multi-use space is very important. Apart from multi-use, you have the kitchen, you have the courtyard, and the toilet area. So multi-use space keeps on shifting within the home towards the end or towards the back, depending on your requirement, depending on your occupation. If you have a small store, then it would probably go on the first floor, and on the ground level, you would have the shop, and your store would be pushed towards the backside of the shop. So these multi-use spaces are where all the family activities happen. These multi-use spaces are the living rooms, the bedrooms, the sitting areas, the study areas, whatever you may like to call it. Everything happens here in these multi-use spaces. Couple of images, some of the homes are decently built, some of them are not. In the middle image, you can see 2 beds up against the wall. So come evening, and these beds would be out on the street so that people can enjoy the cool breeze of the city, and it becomes a sleeping area where you're out on the street and just sleeping out in the open under the stars and sky. Come daytime, this folds back into its position to make room for vehicular and commercial activities. The image on the right-hand side is very true to the site sentiment example of once a family grows or they have a little bit more financial resource to their hand, they would incrementally start building parts of their home. And this is an example of how you incrementally build. You add a room on the same floor or on a different floor. If you remember the conversation of washing on the street and interacting from the pole houses, this is a modern interpretation where there's laundry going on, there are people chit-chatting, the vendors are taking the vegetable carts. So there's a lot of social interaction happening here. average slum dwelling area and unit size, according to a study, is around 28.45 square meters. So if you compare that to 36 square meters of the formally built space, which is the smallest legal size of unit permissible. So this is to reflect back on that. And just to give you an idea, the greens that you were seeing on the plan earlier are these areas which are not built in, areas which have a lot of potential of being a common space, or being even being built on, or multitude of activities could happen here. This is just where the swales end and the water enters the treatment plant. So just reflecting back on that image with a lot of green shown, this is how it actually is on site. There's some sense of waste collection mandated by the city itself. So there is segregation of dry and wet waste, and then there are either hand carts which will bring it out of the slum, and then vehicles and trucks that would come and take it away, run by the municipal corporation. But you can see it's a very difficult life. It's a very difficult existence in these slums for the ones who are servicing this. Equally difficult for the ones who are living here. So I would like to end my presentation with the recommendation of Historic Urban Landscape by UNESCO. Now, say cities are dynamic organisms, and what is it that you would align with while you're designing the city? And food for thought for this wonderful team at Belmont is, how will you design for tomorrow? Will you align your design with the existing heritage of the city? Or will you make an intervention that will benchmark how the city is looked at forever, creating a legacy for tomorrow? All the best to you, and I'll interact hopefully again with you during the course. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Remember, there is no planet B. Thank you very much.